reputation is God wants to have an encounter with you guys. And so we aren't meant to stay the same forever. We were made to collide. And so today I'm going to share with you stories of 3 different people who all had collisions with God. And so I entitled this message, A Prophet, a Pharisee, and a Pariah. All right, I like it because it has 3 P's. And it'll be easy to remember. So the first story I want to share with you guys is Jonah. So he's our prophet. And a lot of you guys know the story, or at least the Sunday school version. You know, he's this dude, he gets swallowed by a fish. Great story. So Jonah, does anyone have their Bibles with them? Oh my gosh, only like 1 person? Okay, cool. Maybe like 5 people. So Jonah is a really small book. It's really small. It's found after Obadiah, pretty cool name, Obadiah, and before Micah. And so I love the story of Jonah because it shows God's compassion not only for Jonah, but for the people he's sending Jonah to, the Ninevites. So God is like, hey, Jonah, I have something for you to do. I want you to go to the Ninevites and tell them about me. And Jonah's like, actually, I hate them. I hate them with a passion. I hate them. I'm not going to do it. And so he gets on a ship going anywhere but to Nineveh. And so he gets on the ship, and God sends a huge storm. And the sailors of the ship were very, I guess you could say they were superstitious. So they start casting lots to figure out why this storm has hit them. And Jonah's like, actually, I know the reason. I'm the reason. And they're like, okay, well, what do we do? He's like, if you throw me overboard, the storm will stop. And so they're like, okay, great. So they throw him overboard. And in the text, it says that then they cried out to God. And it uses the Lord's name. They cried out to the Lord. So before they were these pagan sailors on the ship, they had this encounter with Jonah because of the storm. And he said, I'm trying to flee from God. Which hopefully you guys all have some prior knowledge that it's impossible to flee from God. So these sailors are like, okay, so he was trying to run from God and he sent this big storm, but we threw him overboard and the storm stopped, so God must have really sent him. And so they cry out to the Lord. And so Jonah's thrown overboard, he gets swallowed by a fish. We don't know what kind of animal it is or whatever, what kind of fish. People say it was a whale, but who knows. So he's in the belly of this sea creature for 3 days. And I'm not really sure what he was doing in there for 3 days, just kind of like hanging out, chilling. But he cries out to God, and he's like, okay, I will go to the Ninevites. And God's like, okay, great. And so the fish spits him out on land near where he's supposed to be. And so he does go to Nineveh, but kind of with this kind of smug attitude. He goes and he's like, you know what? They are so bad. I hate them so much. They're probably not going to listen to anything I say. So he goes to the town and says, the Lord gave me this message. If you don't repent, he's going to destroy your city. And they hear it, and they actually take it to heart. So much so that the king tells them, everybody, that they're going to fast. They're going to abstain from all food and drink because they want to see if they can appeal to God so that he'll spare their city. And he does. And so Jonah, at this point, becomes super, super bitter. He's just this angry, I'm picturing this angry little man full of fury. He's bitter at them because God saved the people that he hated. And so he goes off, and it's really, the elements are getting to him. And so God sends this plant that grows up and kind of shades him. And he's like, this is kind of nice, okay. And then the next morning, the plant, it says withers, it dies, it's gone. And Jonah says, I'm so angry I could die because this plant isn't there. And so I like the way the book of Jonah ends. This kind of dramatic exclamation from Jonah, and God's just like, how are you upset over this plant that died, but you weren't really that upset about the thousands of people I was going to destroy? That's the end of the book. So I think that the point I want you guys to get from this story is that God pursues even unwilling vessels and accomplishes his work through them. So Jonah did do what he was asked to do. Eventually, after some a little hiccup along the way, go in the opposite direction, feeling bitter towards the Ninevites, hating them and hating the fact that they were not destroyed. So God pursues even unwilling vessels, and he accomplishes his work through them. I think that's really, really cool. And so this was a collision. You can probably tell that there were many collisions in this story, but I want you guys to focus on Jonah. So that was a collision. The next person I want to share with you guys is Paul. I'm sure you guys all know Paul too. So familiar story. Used to be Saul, and now you guys know him as Paul. So Paul was trained as a Pharisee under this guy. He has a pretty cool name. It's Gamaliel. It was pretty cool. So this guy was like the head Pharisee. If you were going to learn from someone, you wanted to be under Gamaliel. And Saul was. And so he was trained. And one of the first times we hear about Saul, I'll refer to him as Saul right now, is it says that he was at Stephen's stoning. Do you guys know who Stephen was? Yeah, some of you. Okay. So he's at Stephen's stoning, and it says that he approved of the execution. And that's kind of what you hear about Saul, is he's here while a man is being stoned to death. Literally, they would throw stones at them until they died, and he approved of it. And so that kind of sets people up for understanding who Saul is. And so later on in Acts, we read that he is breathing out murderous threats against the Christians and ravaging the church. And that's actually the word that they use, is ravaging the church. So probably not the greatest guy you want to run into if you're a Christian. So Paul was brought up in the Jewish faith, and he saw that this Christian message, even after Jesus was put to death, this Christian message was still carrying on. And these Christians were still popping up everywhere, even though they had killed their leader, Jesus. And so he saw this Christian message as poisonous to the Jewish faith that he had been brought up in. So he kind of gets, he asks permission if he can go kill some Christians. If he encounters them, he's going to get rid of them. And he thinks he's doing the right thing. I think that's something that's kind of scary about this, is he thinks he's doing the right thing. I know we've all kind of run into people who are doing the most, we would say, insane, crazy, weird stuff, and they think like God told them to do it. So we hear that Paul he breathes murderous threats. He's ravaging the church. He's going after all these Christians. But then in Acts 9, can somebody tell me what happens? Okay, you guys know his story. Yes, in the back.
First on the road to Damascus.
Yes, so he's going to Damascus, and this bright, blinding light comes, and he hears a voice that says, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And he says, "Who are you, Lord?" I think it's interesting when he says, "Who are you, Lord?" And so the people he's with don't understand really what's going on. They've probably seen the light, but maybe they didn't hear this kind of conversation, this exchange between the two of them. And I think it's really cool that Saul is actually on his way to go murder some people, and God gets a hold of him. He wasn't looking for God. He wasn't trying to have this encounter. So he's on the road to Damascus to probably keep living out this treacherous life. And God appears to him in a bright, blinding light, and all the people around him know it too. They've witnessed this. So it says that he's blinded. And so the people he's with kind of lead him to a town. And when he's there, he sees in a vision from the Lord that there's a man named Ananias. And so God also, and so God says, like, Ananias is the man who will restore your vision back to you. And so God goes to Ananias, and he says, "Hey, so there's this man named Saul, and he's in the town, and I want you to go to him." And Ananias is like, actually, I've heard about this dude, and what he's done to Christians. I'm not really sure I want to go visit him. And the Lord says, "Go. I've given him a vision, and God is saying, I'm going to use this man in a mighty way to tell the people about me." And so Ananias goes to see Saul, and it says that at this moment he goes and something like scales fall from Paul's eyes. I think that's kind of disgusting. I don't like scaly things. But it says scales fall from his eyes and he's able to see again after 3 days. I don't know if I were Saul what I would have been thinking if for 3 days I couldn't see anything. And it says that during that time, he didn't eat or drink anything either. Probably a little bit shaken up by this experience where he sees God in this light and hears his voice and is kind of turned around. So after this, he was baptized. I think that's really cool. It's like this huge conversion, this huge collision, impactful, forceful, where he has no choice but to change. And one of the steps he takes is he's baptized after this. So does anyone know anything about Paul after this? What are some things you know about Paul? What are some things he wrote? Yeah, like half the New Testament. You are right. So he goes on to write a huge portion of the New Testament. He goes on 3 extensive missionary journeys, preaches about Christ in numerous places. He ends up being imprisoned, persecuted, and executed for his faith. The same faith that he was killing other people over. And that same kind of faith is what Paul has. The reason I think this is so cool is because this was, like a complete 180. He changes and goes the complete opposite direction. The people he was persecuting, he's now one of them, and he becomes a leader amongst them, and has this great relationship with God. And so he just does this complete 180. And he was living this treacherous life until God steps in and uses him. And so a man who was greatly feared ended up being a man who lived to tell other people about Jesus. And I have one more story I want to share with you guys. This one, so she's just known as the woman with the problem of bleeding. So she doesn't have a name. We don't even know her name. I like it when her story is found in the book of Luke. And so Luke was a doctor by profession, yes. And so he's a doctor and he's writing this, so he probably has some background medical knowledge. She has been bleeding for 12 years. 12 years. That's a pretty inconvenient problem to have. When I have a cold, I'm a baby. I'm like, oh, my nose is running. I can't do anything today. Even the smallest sickness. And so this woman had been enduring this for 12 years. And so Luke tells us that no one was able to help this woman. Basically a lost cause. No doctors. She had spent all of her money, exhausted all of her resources trying to find a cure for this. And so what I love about the story is that she was really fearless in every sense of the word. She had to take a huge risk. So unlike these other 2 stories where they weren't necessarily searching for God, they weren't really sure about the type of collision they were going to have, this woman specifically puts herself in a place to collide. She intentionally puts herself in a place where she can collide with Jesus. So if she had been bleeding like this in Jesus' time, she would have been considered unclean. So other people didn't want to touch her, they didn't want to be around her, but she had heard that Jesus was going to be coming near to where she was, and she was like, I need to go see him. I need to go see him. She had probably heard stories about how he had healed other people, and the miracles that he had done. She was like, I need this. I have tried everything else. And so she wanted to do whatever it took to collide with Jesus. That she probably had to fight through some crowds where she would have been an outcast. That's what pariah means. It's an outcast, someone who is on the outside of everything else that's going on. She wasn't accepted by this community because she was seen as unclean. And so 12 years is a long time to go without hugs or something like that. So she was desperate. She wanted to see Jesus. She knew what he could do. She had heard about the miracles. And so she pushes her way through the crowd. And the reason it's a risk is she knew he was going to be there, but she didn't know if she'd even be able to get near him, or if she did get near him, if she would be healed. So she's like, but this is what I have to do. So she intentionally puts herself in a place where she's going to collide with Jesus. And so she touches, it says, just the edge of his robe. Just the edge. If you guys have your schedules, there's a really cool picture of this. I think it's on the back page, where it shows her kind of reaching out. And on Jesus' robe, and I love that it shows this in the picture, there's some fringe on the bottom. Do you guys see that? Yeah, there is fringe. Yeah, Kevin knows. And so she's reaching out, and she just has to touch the fringe. And I also think it's cool, the name for this fringe, specifically on these robes, is called Zeet Zeet. So she knows she just has to touch the Zeet Zeet. And she's going to be healed. And so, just the slightest touch. And so she goes, she fights through the crowd, she touches the fringe, and Jesus immediately says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples were like, we have a huge crowd around here, Lord. What are you talking about? How are you ever going to be able to tell who touched you? It's kind of like if you guys have ever been to a concert, beforehand, you're standing up front. I love going to live shows. So you're standing up front waiting for the band, and then suddenly the band comes out, and it's like everyone just runs forward. They push forward. And if you're in the front row, you're done. You are done. You are flat on the stage in front of you. And so I picture this kind of crowd pressing in on all sides around Jesus. And his disciples say, how can you even feel that someone touched you? And he said, I feel like power has gone from me. And so the woman comes forward knowing that it was her and that she had been healed. And so she comes forward and says, "Lord, I was the one that touched you and I was healed." And he says, "Daughter, go in peace. Your faith has healed you." Can you imagine what those words must have felt like to her after 12 years of enduring this? I don't care what it is for 12 years. 12 years is a long time to endure anything. And he says, your faith has healed you. It's made you well. It wasn't, her upbringing that healed her. It wasn't the people that she knew. It wasn't any wealth that she had accumulated over this period of time. It was her faith, her genuine faith. And she put herself in a place to intentionally collide with Jesus. So this was another collision. When two things collide, one of them must change. So with Jonah, if he was a prophet, he was called by God, and kind of was unwilling about these things. So I want you to remember, because maybe you'll have some discussions about this afternoon, Jonah, that God pursues even unwilling vessels and accomplishes his work. Something else about the story of Jonah is God had compassion on Jonah, but also the Ninevites. I think that's really important to look at. So if you guys have time, Jonah is a really short book. You could probably read it in just a few minutes. That God spares the Ninevites. If I were someone in that city, I would be pretty excited that I had some kind of collision with God. It would mean that I was alive. And then Saul and Paul, it's the same dude, Saul/Paul. He was someone who was actively persecuting other Christians, and God appeared to him in this crazy way. And not every one of us has this really dramatic or intense conversion story. I know I grew up in the church with a Christian family, so there wasn't ever a moment where I was like doing drugs and at rock bottom, and I was like, Jesus, I need you. But it was kind of this gradual thing, but my life was definitely changed. And so with Saul, this was this dramatic conversion. And maybe some of you guys have had it. You've had like a near-death experience or something else happen in your life where it was the moment you knew that you needed God. And so he has this dramatic experience, this collision with God, even though he's not necessarily looking for it. God stepped into his life and completely changed it, if you guys learn more about Paul after that. And then the woman who intentionally put herself in a place to collide. I think that's really important. We're going to be talking more about that later tonight, putting yourself in a place where you can collide with Jesus and what that can look like. So what do you think it would look like if we were intentional about colliding with God? If we put ourselves out there, or what if, when God reveals himself, we actually responded? I really want you guys this afternoon, now that it's light out, we kind of woke up and you get to see the camp. Last night we got here, it was pretty dark. So it was cool for me this morning to wake up and see this awesome view. I think that's one of the ways that God reveals himself. So when God is revealing himself to you in these ways, in the different conversations you're having today, or just as you're running around, to know that God created your body to be able to be active and do all these things, to really pay attention when God reveals himself to you. It doesn't have to be in this super dramatic, blinding light, but it's all around us. So I want you guys to take note of that this afternoon, and hopefully have some conversations about that. And what I want you to take away, I'm going to be closing in a few minutes here, but what I want you to take away from this is that God isn't limited in what he can do or who he uses to accomplish these things. He's not limited at all by any of these things. We talked about 3 different people who had very different collisions, and God isn't limited by any of these different circumstantial things going on in their life. And they all ended up having a collision. Sometimes in these stories, multiple collisions. So I think that God has brought you here, each one of you. We talked about this last night for different reasons. But I think he brought each of you here to collide with him. It's always fascinating to me to see how crazy people will go to collide with a celebrity. Yeah, have you guys ever seen these nutsos? I mean, you hear about them in the news, like people who will camp out and wait for someone to pass by, or try to sneak in places or sneak backstage or whatever it is, or people who go to like every Lady Gaga concert ever, and they spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on these tickets for shows to collide with just a chance of colliding with these celebrities. That if we have a chance to collide with the creator of the universe, the creator of you, he created you. If you had a chance to collide with him and to actually acknowledge this, wouldn't you do anything you could? Anything. Compare it to these people who want to collide with these celebrities or whoever it is. Spending hundreds of dollars, maybe wearing some kind of disguise to creep up on someone, and we have this opportunity to collide with God this weekend. So he's brought you here because he wants to collide with you. And so later tonight, we're going to talk about why we would want to collide with him and kind of what that would make a difference in your life. And so I'm going to close here with some prayer, and I want you to know, thanks for putting this up on the screen. God is not limited in what he can do or who he uses to accomplish those things. All right, would you bow your heads with me? Dear Lord, I